So then we are back with the more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services, where we find the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Israelic lineage, so then we can understand the time of the end as per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find layers of understanding of the spring feast, the autumn feast, and also the returning of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. As we read then Yeshayahu the prophet, we always understand a section of it related with the 61st chapter, where the Messiah himself, then very busy during his time of the completion of the spring feast, he was then teaching and showing his people very many situations of the holy instructions. And on the 4th chapter of Luke, we find then the Messiah himself being involved with the congregation, and he was in the synagogue, and as it was usual then standing at the Shabbat day, and it was handed to him a particular Megillah of the prophet Yeshayahu, and he was reading then the section related with the 61st chapter. Very importantly, as he was reading this specific chapter, he knew that it was then concerning himself as then the person whom Moses then warned his people in order to make sure to understand when this prophet comes, listen to him. And then later on, as he was in the synagogue reading, he was particularly involved with the 61st chapter, explaining then the spring feast that the Creator himself had sent him in order to show the instructions for the unfortunate, to lift up their spirits, and make sure then later on he was then reading a section, and prior of the section related with vengeance, he closed the Megillah and gave back to the person in charge. So then, what can we gather from the holy instructions as far as Yohanan chapter 1:5 and what the Messiah has said? He has come to give then understanding of the holy instructions, and particularly he was explaining those people who were then aside because of the schemes and politics of the religion of the time. He was then giving the instructions so then the people would produce fruit. So then Yohanan chapter 1:5 gives us sections of the Creator being then the cultivator, and the Messiah is the vine, and we then are the branches. Then the Messiah explains the branches themselves, they can't produce fruit if they are apart from the vine. And then the Messiah goes on and explains, if the branch does not stay with the main vine, then the branch can't produce fruit. Now the Messiah said some of them are going to produce it 10 or 100 or more, or 100-fold more than should. But then why this gathering of fruit is so important? Because the Messiah was directing his people not to become involved with the cares of this world. Yet he was mentioning for his people to become aware of the next kingdom coming from heaven. This is what the Messiah was then entitled to do, and he did. As far as the new kingdom coming, we understand at some point his people are going to understand what the Messiah has said thoroughly, and then they're going to start functioning in what the Messiah has said, so then fruit then must be produced. The Messiah was not playing around as far as with these instructions, because as he came to give directives, so as the people, as they listened, so as they understand, so then they must produce fruit. The point is not only having other people speak and talk and producing fruit, but when a person knows the truth, a person must produce fruit with what was given, so then what the Messiah has said then becomes true. What can we understand as far as what the Messiah has said regarding the world? The world does not understand the Messiah, obviously. Many of the nations are outside of the Hebraic understanding, the Hebraic culture, and they don't understand the importance of the holy feasts and becoming part of it. As a set of holy instructions or holy gatherings, or known as Moadim, as we come together and we understand the moment of each of those feasts. So then, we understand each of those brings us a piece of the information in order for us to produce fruit. Now, there are lots of people around the world, they are fruit inspectors. They are always inspecting somebody else's life. That's what the Messiah said. Make sure you understand the speck of your own eye before you go to somebody else and then judging somebody else, either in the spirit or in person. So then, the Messiah is the very basis of producing fruit. If we don't do what he said, not being concerned with anybody else as far as what the Messiah has said, it's not for anybody becoming inspectors of someone else's fruit. Yet we must hear what the Messiah has said and do and produce fruit from the instructions where the Messiah himself and taught others. Now, people that are always judging somebody else and always judging somebody else, always searching for somebody else to put the blame on, or they want to become fruit inspectors of somebody else, they never produce fruit themselves. So then, as the Messiah has said, having a double tongue never works at the end, because the Messiah knows the reality of teaching and of this world. We're going to evaluate these more when the Messiah then obviously was placed in a very hard situation. There came a time in his ministry that the Roman Empire was trying to get him because he was becoming extremely influential. Thus, the people of the law and the other people, they brought him at the presence of the Roman authorities and asked him if they should pay taxes to Caesar. Very important question. The Messiah asked then for a piece of coin, piece of money. Then he was asking, what face is this? What's on this coin? And they say, the face of Caesar. And he very wisely said, give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and God what belongs to God. So they were ashamed, because they were not reading and understanding the fruit the Messiah was explaining. The Messiah was in his entire life producing fruit and teaching other people how to produce fruit. And those people who are interested, they were going after him and would ask him questions. But sometimes in this world, pride and ways of trying to inspect someone else's life sometimes becoming greater than what the Messiah has said to do. So then, we are then explaining sections of what the Messiah has done. The Messiah becomes the center focus of our lives. However, there is a time and a place when a person can share properly what the Messiah has done. It requires a study, requires then a bit of writing and reading, and most importantly requires then the knowledge of the holy feasts. It's not only explaining what the Messiah has done, but then the sequences of each year maintained by the Hebrews, because in those we find then the prophetic shadow events of the future was involved with. Thus you can read in Hebrews chapter 7, sections of it, and chapter 10. So then, people, when they read the instructions, they get very anxious as far as trying to find an answer for their own problems. The Messiah, however, as we study him and we understand what he does, then he prepares us for what's coming. Let's give an example. When the Messiah was then placed before the Roman authorities, could we then be a bit apprehensive of being in their presence? Of course, each of us would have. Now, the Messiah was prepared because he was studying the instructions constantly. And the Spirit gave him the precise answer at the precise time. So each of those people who were trying to get him, they were ashamed at. Because they couldn't understand this person was very wise. So then, bearing fruit from purposes of the holy instructions when we read them, when we understand the Moadim, understand the holy feasts, Leviticus the 23rd chapter, then we understand the spring and then autumn feasts. We understand then the Gospels. We understand there were 4 writers of the autumn feast. You find then Yohanan. And not only Yohanan, but then those who were with him, then explaining the prophecies to those around him. This gives us then a bit of understanding when we are sometimes down, sometimes we sin, when we repent of it, and we move on, and we study the holy instructions more than previously. Because we understand grace was given, so then we further ourselves into the study. Though sometimes we sense lots of situations going on in the world, we then become loyal to what the Messiah has done. And as far as we can say, as long as we stay with the Messiah, the more we understand of him. Next time I'm going to explain more what the Messiah has done and why then he was speaking with the people only in parables. He will not speak at any way that was then directly, because people would not understand. So then, people, when they don't have the knowledge, when they don't have the understanding, when they don't study, when they don't read, they are not acquainted with the holy instructions and the holy feasts. When they receive an understanding that is not apt, in their opinion, with the level where they are at, then rather than becoming light, they mock because they don't understand the stupidity they are involved with. So the Messiah was then explaining these areas directly with his people because they were constantly studying. So they had the steps of formation, and they could obviously make sense out of it. Now, people in the world, when they don't study the holy instructions, they want only pleasure. They want more money, more influence. They want more properties. And this is what the Messiah was then fighting against during his entire ministry. He was speaking with people who want more money. And the Messiah was explaining, you won't be able to save your soul if you want only money of this world. You can't serve the eternal and you can't serve money at the same time. Either one or the other. And since we are then during this time of conversion, of understanding, of reading, as we understand these instructions, they were dormant for 1,000 years plus. So the whole movement during the time of Yohanan and the first 1,000 years of the Messiah, they are returning, and we must read and becoming acquainted with it. So then, based from these, later on I'm going to explain more of this topic. So please stay tuned, much more coming up.